The morning sunlight hit the rolling hills where my ancestors had walked for centuries, and yet the fields that should have been mine were no longer mine. I stood at the edge of the property, the familiar wind brushing against my face, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and earth that had been part of my family's heritage for generations. And yet, beneath that serenity, there was a bitter reality. This land had been stolen. I could still remember the day I discovered it. A casual online property search, meant to explore opportunities for expansion, revealed something that stopped my heart. My family's ancestral land, the land that had fed us, sheltered us, and formed the very fabric of our history, had been acquired, not just by someone wealthy, but by a group of billionaires, people so powerful that their names alone commanded fear and respect. What? How? I whispered, staring at the documents on my laptop. Legal filings, deeds, transactions. It was all there, cold and undeniable. The land had been carved up piece by piece, quietly, systematically, through a network of shell companies and offshore trusts. There was no dramatic confrontation, no bold heist, just a slow, suffocating erasure of our heritage. And for years I had watched from afar, helpless, as this injustice unfolded. But something inside me stirred that day, a fire I could no longer ignore. They thought they could erase generations of history with paperwork and money. They had underestimated the power of someone who understood not just the value of the land, but the weight of its legacy. I began my journey cautiously. First, research. Every property transaction, every corporate veil, every loophole in the law became a piece of the puzzle. I spent countless hours in archives, legal libraries, and online databases. There were moments when the scale of the task felt insurmountable. Billionaires wielded resources beyond imagination, armies of lawyers, financial strategists, private investigators. But they had overlooked one thing. I had the knowledge of the land itself, its history, its connections, and the drive of someone who would not accept defeat. I found an ally in Elena, a sharp, fearless lawyer who had experience challenging corporate titans. "This won't be easy," she warned me the first time we met in a small, dimly lit office. "They play by different rules, rules designed to protect them. But if anyone can navigate the maze, it's you. You know the land, you know its history, and you're not afraid to fight." Her words were both comforting and terrifying. I had no idea what lay ahead, but the fire inside me refused to be extinguished. Our first step was to gather evidence of the questionable acquisitions, tracking shell companies and uncovering connections that would expose how the billionaires had effectively stolen the land without overtly breaking the law. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I spent hours tracing ownership records, cross-referencing legal filings, and piecing together a complex web that spanned continents. Every discovery was a small victory, a crack in the armor of the people who had tried to erase our history. Every time I encountered another obstacle, a sealed transaction, a hidden trust, I felt my determination grow. And then, finally, we found the key, a loophole buried deep in the original acquisition. A tiny clause overlooked by the billionaires' high-powered lawyers, a vulnerability that could be exploited if we were smart and strategic. Elena looked at me with a mixture of awe and cautious excitement. "If we play this right, we can challenge the ownership legally. We can force them to either return the land or face a public scandal that could ruin them. But you have to be prepared. This will get personal. They will fight back." I nodded, the fire inside me now burning brighter than ever. "I don't care how personal it gets. This is our legacy, our heritage. I will reclaim what is mine, no matter the cost." The first real confrontation was symbolic rather than physical. A formal notice, a carefully worded legal challenge sent through our channels. It was a small ripple in a vast ocean, but it was enough to make them noticed. And once they noticed, the game began.
The response was swift and ruthless. Letters arrived with the air of intimidation, filled with legal jargon designed to confuse and overwhelm. Private investigators began to shadow me, subtly letting me know they were watching, testing my resolve. I had expected resistance, but this level of calculated intimidation was unlike anything I had faced before. But I refused to back down. Each threat, each attempt to scare me, strengthened my resolve. I began documenting everything, every encounter, every letter, every shadowy presence. My mission was no longer just about reclaiming land. It was about ensuring that truth and justice could withstand the weight of unimaginable wealth and power. The fight became strategic. Elena and I coordinated with local activists, historians, and journalists, slowly turning our investigation into a campaign that highlighted the billionaires' questionable tactics. We were meticulous, deliberate, and calculated, avoiding the traps designed to trap the unsuspecting. And then came the turning point, a direct meeting. I requested an audience with the representatives of the billionaires, a neutral venue chosen carefully, public yet private enough to negotiate. The stakes were clear. This was not a casual discussion. This was a battle for the soul of our land, the legacy of generations. The representatives arrived, slick, polished, and arrogant. They had assumed fear, submission, or silence, but instead they found determination, knowledge, and a strategy that they could not anticipate. I presented our findings, step by step, exposing the hidden transactions, the shell companies, and the vulnerabilities that had been ignored. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in their eyes. Confidence, carefully curated and reinforced by wealth and power, wavered under the weight of truth and relentless preparation. This was the power of strategy, the culmination of months of research, legal preparation, and sheer perseverance. Negotiations were tense, filled with veiled threats, legal posturing, and psychological games. Every word mattered, every pause was calculated, and every move was scrutinized. But my focus remained unshakable. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, honoring generations who had walked this land long before any billionaire laid claim. And then the breakthrough. A settlement was reached. The land, our ancestral heritage, was returned, not through intimidation, not through wealth, but through strategy, preparation, and relentless perseverance. I had stared down billionaires, navigated their labyrinth of power, and emerged victorious. As I walked across the reclaimed fields for the first time, feeling the soil beneath my feet, a sense of triumph and responsibility filled me. This land was more than property. It was history, legacy, and identity, and I had reclaimed it, not just for myself, but for generations past and future. Yet even in victory, there was a lesson, a recognition that power is often wielded without conscience, that vigilance is required, and that determination can overcome even the most overwhelming odds. The sun set over the rolling hills, casting long shadows across the fields, and as I stood there, victorious yet humbled, I knew that reclaiming the land was only the beginning. Protecting it, honoring it, and building a legacy upon it would be the true measure of triumph.
The victory of reclaiming my ancestral land felt monumental, yet fleeting. I had won the first battle, but the war for preserving it and confronting the billionaires' lingering influence was only beginning. The moment I set foot on the freshly returned fields, I realized just how much had been lost over the years, how much history, soil, and legacy had been quietly stripped away. Every tree, every stone, every patch of grass carried stories my family had lived, and the weight of responsibility pressed down heavily on me. I spent the first few days simply walking the land, reconnecting with its rhythms, understanding the boundaries, the hidden corners, the water sources, and the old structures my ancestors had built. It was therapeutic, grounding, and yet it was also a reconnaissance mission in its own right. Knowledge of the land was power. To protect it fully, I needed to know every inch as intimately as they did centuries ago. But I couldn't ignore the fact that those billionaires were not defeated in the traditional sense. They were merely challenged. I knew they were observing, analyzing every move I made, calculating how to retaliate or regain leverage. Their resources were immense, their influence vast, and their ego vast enough to orchestrate subtle forms of revenge. I needed allies beyond legal counsel, people who understood strategy, local politics, and the pulse of the land itself. Elena suggested forming a coalition: historians, local authorities, environmentalists, journalists, and even former rivals who had been displaced by the billionaires' acquisitions. Power respects power, she said. If you want to protect the land, you have to show that it's not just one person's fight, it's a collective force. I took her advice seriously.
Meetings were held, emails sent, calls made, and slowly a network emerged. People who had once been isolated or powerless found a voice and purpose in this shared struggle. We mapped potential threats, identified legal loopholes still in play, and established communication channels that would allow rapid responses if the billionaires tried to interfere again. The first indication that they had noticed our coalition came subtly. Small, almost imperceptible delays in local permits, inspections, and approvals. A construction crew sent to restore one of the old family barns was held up inexplicably for days. Elena smiled knowingly. They're testing the waters. They want to see if intimidation still works. But we were ready. We documented everything meticulously, prepared public statements, and ensured that every legal requirement was met. It was a chess game, and each move needed precision. I realized that reclaiming the land wasn't just about ownership. It was about asserting dominance in a world where wealth often overshadowed justice. One evening, while surveying the eastern boundary of the property, I noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked discreetly along the ridge. Their presence was too calculated to be coincidental. I alerted Elena and a local contact who specialized in private investigations. Within hours, we discovered that a team of private agents had been deployed, probably at the direction of the billionaires, to monitor activities on the land. It was then I understood. The victory was symbolic, but the fight for autonomy was real. These people had resources, but I had knowledge, preparation, and a personal stake that money could not buy. Every inch of this land carried generations of connection, memory, and determination, something no billionaire could fabricate or erase. We implemented security measures, not flashy, not obtrusive, but effective. Cameras disguised in natural foliage, early warning systems triggered by movement, and secure communication lines that were impossible to intercept. I walked the land at dawn, dusk, and night, learning the rhythms of the natural world and using it to our advantage. We turned the land itself into a guardian, using its features strategically against those who would threaten it. Yet, despite these measures, a sense of tension lingered. Every decision I made had consequences. Every oversight could be exploited, and the billionaires' thirst for dominance was insatiable. I realized that this journey wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about redefining what it meant to fight for justice against unimaginable power.
The first direct confrontation came unexpectedly. A representative from one of the billionaire families arrived under the guise of a mediator, claiming to seek a peaceful resolution over land use and development rights. I had expected such tactics, and yet, the moment he stepped onto the property, the subtle intimidation was palpable. His presence was calculated, confident, and meant to assert control. Elena prepared me beforehand. Remember, negotiation is a tool. Fear is a tactic. Don't let appearances deceive you. Stick to facts, assert your ownership, and never reveal uncertainty. The meeting began cordially, but it quickly turned into a psychological battlefield. He attempted to dismiss the legitimacy of my claims subtly, questioning records and implying that my family's rights were outdated or legally tenuous. But I countered each point with meticulous documentation, historical records, and legal precedent. This land is not just a plot of earth, I said firmly. It carries the legacy of generations. You cannot erase history with money or influence. Any attempt to interfere will be met with scrutiny, legal challenge, and public accountability. For a moment he faltered, the arrogance in his posture slightly dimmed. I realized then that the billionaire's true power was perception, but perception could be countered with confidence, knowledge, and unyielding resolve. After hours of tense negotiation, the representative left with little to show, frustrated and calculating. The victory was small but symbolic. It demonstrated that while wealth could intimidate, preparation and conviction could neutralize that intimidation. In the days following, I began leveraging the media strategically. Local newspapers and international outlets became aware of the dispute, though carefully framed to avoid sensationalism. The billionaires' tactics of secrecy and subterfuge were undermined by transparency, compelling them to reconsider overt interference. The land itself became both a battleground and an ally. We restored fields, cultivated crops, and rebuilt structures using historical methods, honoring the legacy while fortifying the property. Every action was deliberate, a message that the land was alive with heritage, vigilance, and resistance. One evening, as I watched the sun set over the hills, I reflected on the journey.
The battle wasn't just against individuals, it was against a system where wealth often trumped justice. But the fight reaffirmed a truth I had known all along: determination, strategy, and a deep connection to what is rightfully yours can withstand even the most formidable forces. The Billionaires' representatives continued to watch, probe, and test, but I was ready. Each attempt they made to intimidate, negotiate, or reclaim leverage was met with careful planning, transparency, and legal precision. The property was more than land. It was a symbol of resistance, legacy, and the unyielding will to reclaim what was stolen. And yet, I knew the path ahead would not be smooth. Every victory attracted scrutiny, every step forward invited challenge, and the Billionaires were relentless. The next confrontation would be larger, more complex, and more dangerous. But I had proven one fundamental truth: even against the wealthiest and most powerful, preparation, strategy, and courage can reclaim what was lost. The fields lay quiet under the moonlight, a temporary calm, but I could sense the storm approaching. The real test was still ahead, one that would demand every ounce of strategy, every connection, and every lesson learned from the long journey so far.
The victory of reclaiming the first layer of my ancestral land was empowering, but the Billionaires were far from defeated. In fact, it felt as though reclaiming the land had provoked a storm I hadn't fully anticipated. Within days, subtle but unmistakable changes began to ripple across the property. Surveillance drones appeared on the horizon at dawn, their small mechanical wings buzzing quietly, almost imperceptibly. Unmarked vehicles prowled nearby roads, moving in ways that suggested coordination and careful observation. I knew immediately the battle was escalating. The Billionaires were deploying more than lawyers and PR campaigns. They were mobilizing their vast technological and logistical resources. Every inch of my reclaimed land, every legal document, every tree and stone was under scrutiny. And yet, despite the looming threat, a strange exhilaration surged within me. For the first time, I truly understood the weight of heritage and the lengths to which I would go to protect it. Carter, a former intelligence analyst I had recruited to monitor threats and technological intrusions, briefed me meticulously. "They're not just testing you," he said, his fingers flying across the laptop keyboard, analyzing drone patterns and satellite overlays. "They're mapping every possible vulnerability. They want to see how fast you respond, what measures you take, and most importantly, where the cracks in your defense are." I examined the field from the hilltop, observing the drones. They moved with precision, almost eerily synchronized, scanning the perimeter and even the buildings. I felt the gaze of wealth and power stretching across the hills, measuring, calculating, and probing. And yet, I refused to yield to fear. Elena and I convened a strategy session late into the night. Maps, documents, and legal precedents were spread across the table like battle plans. "They think they can intimidate through technology and money," she said, voice low but determined. "But you've got something they don't: history, knowledge, and the people who care about it. Every move we make should expose their overreach without violating the law. Make them fight in the court of public opinion, not just behind their lawyers' desks." I nodded. That was the key. Strategy wouldn't just be legal, it would be psychological, symbolic, and visible. I needed to make a statement that this land and its legacy could not be erased by the structures my ancestors had built, the cultural artifacts embedded in its soil, and the careful ways we were restoring and protecting it. Cameras clicked, notebooks filled, and video footage spread rapidly across social media platforms. Within hours, the world knew. The land was not just property, it was a heritage worth protecting. By midday, the first countermeasure arrived. Private security contractors hired by the Billionaires appeared on neighboring properties, trying to intimidate workers and block access to certain areas. Their movements were subtle but coordinated, intended to provoke fear without direct confrontation. I confronted them directly, standing at the edge of the property with Elena and Carter by my side. "This land is private property," I stated firmly, voice carrying across the field. "You have no right to harass or block access. Any interference will be documented, reported, and legally challenged." The contractors hesitated, unaccustomed to direct defiance. Their eyes flicked towards each other, weighing options. They were used to wealth speaking louder than courage, but they hadn't anticipated someone willing to fight with knowledge, preparation, and determination. After a tense moment, they withdrew, and I realized Intimidation only works if it is unopposed. By evening, I could sense that the billionaires were recalibrating. This was no longer a quiet land acquisition. They were facing resistance that was visible, strategic, and increasingly public. And I knew that the next phase of confrontation would escalate beyond surveillance and legal maneuvering.
The real escalation arrived a week later. A letter, hand-delivered to the edge of the property, bore the crest of one of the billionaire families. It was a mix of veiled threats and legal jargon, suggesting consequences that sounded ominous but remained deliberately vague. Cease your unauthorized activities or face actions that will make you reconsider your course, it read. Elena reviewed it carefully. It's intimidation, she said. They're trying to force you into inaction by implying consequences without specifying them. Classic tactic. Vague, psychological, but effective if you respond emotionally rather than strategically. I didn't flinch. Instead, I documented the letter, made multiple copies, and began planning the next move. My goal was no longer just to reclaim the land. It was to secure it so decisively that future intimidation would fail. Carter suggested technological countermeasures. We need to neutralize drones, monitor satellite scans, and secure communication lines. They have tools, but so do we, if we use them intelligently. Over the next days, I coordinated with local tech experts, installing counter-surveillance systems, motion detectors disguised in natural terrain, and secure encrypted channels for communication. Every inch of the property became a fortress without ever appearing fortified. Nature itself became an ally. Tree lines, watercourses, and terrain features provided natural protection and early warning systems. But the billionaires were relentless. Attempts to block legal permits, manipulate local authorities, and create public controversy emerged simultaneously. Elena and I had to anticipate every move, prepare contingency plans, and maintain transparency to protect credibility. It was a complex, high-stakes chess game, with each action met with reaction, and each reaction countered with strategy. Then came the moment of public confrontation. A private contractor attempted to erect a temporary structure on part of the land, claiming rights granted by a recently filed obscure corporate agreement. I mobilized witnesses, legal representatives, and media coverage simultaneously. The contractors were forced to halt immediately, their actions recorded, broadcast, and legally challenged. It was a small victory, but it sent a powerful message. The land could not be bullied or bought into submission. I had learned that power alone was insufficient against determination, preparation, and public accountability. That night, standing under the stars, I realized something profound. Reclaiming the land was more than a personal victory. It was a statement about legacy, justice, and perseverance against seemingly insurmountable odds. Every billionaire tactic, every legal loophole, every attempt at insemination had been neutralized not through brute force, but through strategy, resilience, and the courage to act decisively. Yet I knew the battle was far from over. Wealth could regroup, resources could be mobilized, and escalation could take forms more dangerous than surveillance or legal threats. I had to anticipate their next moves, and that meant thinking several steps ahead. Technology, law, media, and public influence. Every action would be a test of endurance, intelligence, and resolve. As I walked the fields, feeling the soil beneath my feet, I understood that this was a turning point. The billionaires had underestimated the power of someone intimately connected to what was theirs by legacy, history, and blood. But the war for the land, the battle for respecting control, was only entering its most dangerous phase. And somewhere across the city, I could sense the wheels turning, the billionaires plotting, calculating, waiting. But I was ready. I had prepared, I had allies, and I had the history and heritage that no amount of money could erase. The night was silent, deceptive in its calm, as I gazed at the horizon. The next confrontation was coming, larger, more public, and more complex. And I knew that when it arrived, it would test everything I had learned and everything I was willing to fight for. The tension had reached a boiling point. Reclaiming the land had not ended the struggle, it had ignited it. Now, the billionaires weren't content with quiet intimidation or passive resistance. They were escalating. Satellite imagery, high-end surveillance drones, and even attempts to influence local politicians and media outlets became daily obstacles. Every step I took on the property carried both triumph and danger. Elena and I had prepared for months, but the scale of their resources was staggering. These weren't just individuals, they were empires, networks of wealth and influence that could sway decisions across borders. Yet, I felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos. Knowledge, strategy, and persistence could counter even the most formidable adversaries. Our first major challenge came in the form of a legal injunction filed by one of the billionaire families, claiming that portions of the land were under disputed corporate agreements. The court papers were meticulously detailed, overwhelming to an untrained eye, but Elena and I dissected every paragraph. Every loophole, every irregularity, every historical record that favored my family's claim became a weapon in our arsenal. "Remember," Elena said, pacing the office late one night, "this isn't just about winning in court. It's about controlling the narrative. Public perception, media scrutiny, and historical legitimacy are as important as legal precedent. They can throw money at lawyers, but they can't rewrite history in the public eye." I nodded. The fight was no longer solely on the land. It was in every boardroom, courtroom, and media outlet that had influence over the narrative, and I had to be relentless. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and I felt the weight of generations pressing down. Walking into the courthouse, I carried more than just documents. I carried the legacy of my ancestors, the stories of the soil, and the determination of a family wronged. Inside, the billionaire representatives were calm, polished, and arrogantly confident. They had armies of lawyers, financial experts, and media consultants. But Elena and I were ready. Every piece of evidence, every historical record, every documented irregularity in their acquisition was presented with precision. As arguments unfolded, I realized that the courtroom was a stage for strategy and performance. Facts were crucial, but conviction, composure, and presentation carried equal weight. Every objection, every cross-examination, every subtle demonstration of preparedness added to the pressure on their legal team. By the end of the day, it was clear that we had disrupted their expectations. Their carefully constructed confidence wavered, and I could sense that they were recalculating, reassessing, and realizing that wealth alone couldn't guarantee victory.
After the court hearing, the battle shifted from legal maneuvering to psychological and strategic pressure. Attempts to sway local authorities intensified, inspections became more frequent, permits faced delays, and rumors spread subtly through the community, questioning the legitimacy of my claims. The billionaires' tactics were clear. They wanted to wear me down, to exhaust me mentally and emotionally so that mistakes could be exploited. But I refused to yield. Every obstacle was anticipated, every threat countered, and every narrative challenged with facts and transparency. We leveraged media strategically, highlighting the historical significance of the land and the questionable methods used to acquire it. Public awareness became a powerful ally. One morning, a team of contractors arrived, claiming they had legal authorization to survey a portion of the land. It was an obvious intimidation tactic. I met them at the boundary, flanked by Elena, Carter, and local witnesses. "This land is private property," I stated firmly. "No surveys, no construction, and no access will occur without documented authorization and approval from both legal and local authorities. Any interference will be challenged immediately." The contractors hesitated, their confidence shaken by the presence of documentation, legal counsel, and witnesses. After a tense standoff, they withdrew, leaving the boundary secure. It was a small victory, but it underscored a crucial lesson. Preparedness and knowledge could neutralize intimidation, even when faced with immense wealth and power. Over the following weeks, we continued to fortify both the land and its narrative. Restoration efforts proceeded with care, ensuring that every action honored the historical legacy while reinforcing legal claims. Drone surveillance, motion sensors, and natural barriers were integrated seamlessly into the landscape. Every step, every restoration, every cultivated field became a statement. This land belonged to those who had nurtured it for generations. Yet the billionaires were not idle. A sophisticated campaign to question the legitimacy of my ownership was launched subtly in local media. Anonymous reports, misleading statements, and subtle insinuations attempted to sway public perception. But transparency, documentation, and a consistent narrative countered these tactics. Then came the pivotal moment. An unexpected ally from within one of the billionaire networks reached out privately, offering crucial information. They revealed internal communications indicating concern over our legal and media strategy, along with plans for more aggressive intervention. This insider knowledge was invaluable. It allowed us to anticipate moves, prepare countermeasures, and further solidify our position. With this new information, we orchestrated a bold public statement, inviting journalists, historians, and community leaders to witness a ceremonial event on the land. Restoration projects, historical narratives, and cultural significance were showcased prominently. Media coverage was widespread, amplifying public support and demonstrating that the land was more than property. It was heritage and identity.
The billionaires' calculated intimidation began to falter. Legal maneuvers, surveillance, and subtle manipulation could no longer dominate the narrative. For the first time, it felt as though power alone could not dictate the outcome. Strategy, preparation, and public support had shifted the balance. And yet, even in this moment of tactical success, I knew that the true confrontation was still ahead. The billionaires would not accept loss quietly, and escalation was inevitable. The next phase will test every skill, every ally, and every ounce of determination. But standing on the land, feeling the soil beneath my feet, I knew one fundamental truth. Heritage, justice, and relentless courage can withstand even the mightiest adversaries. The moon rose over the rolling hills, casting shadows across the fields, serene yet charged with anticipation. The next encounter would be decisive, a high-stakes clash where strategy, public perception, and the legacy of generations collided. And I was ready.
The tension had shifted from strategy to open confrontation. After months of legal battles, surveillance, and public campaigns, the billionaires were preparing their next move. It was no longer subtle. It was direct, calculated, and relentless. I could feel the magnitude of what was coming, like standing on the edge of a storm that could either cleanse or devastate everything I had worked for. Early one morning, Carter arrived with a grim expression. "They're mobilizing a new legal team," he said. "This one is international, high profile, and extremely aggressive. They're not just targeting the land, they're trying to dismantle our coalition, discredit our witnesses, and challenge every aspect of our strategy." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment but refusing to show fear. "Then we escalate too. We fight every front, every angle, and we anticipate every move. They want a war? They'll get one, but on our terms." Elena had already begun preparing the next set of legal filings, countermeasures designed not just to defend, but to assert dominance. Every document, every historical record, every witness testimony was sharpened like a blade. The billionaires had wealth and lawyers, but we had knowledge, preparation, and public support, a combination that no amount of money could fully counter. The first sign of escalation came in the form of a legal injunction aimed at halting restoration projects on the land. Contractors, equipment, and workers were threatened with immediate legal action if they proceeded. It was a subtle attempt to paralyze operations and weaken morale. I walked the fields, observing the halted progress, feeling the frustration rise, but I reminded myself, this was expected. "They're testing us," I told Carter and Elena. "Every delay, every threat, they're seeing how we respond, and we will respond strategically." We held an emergency strategy session, bringing in technology experts, legal advisors, and community representatives. Every possible scenario was mapped, every threat countered before it could materialize. The land itself became our ally. Natural boundaries, historical landmarks, and cultural heritage sites were leveraged not just for protection, but as legal and symbolic proof of ownership. Then came the public escalation. News of the billionaires' legal maneuvers leaked to major media outlets, painting a misleading picture of contested ownership. Anonymous articles questioned the validity of my family's claim and implied that the restoration projects were unauthorized. The pressure was immense, both emotional and strategic. But we responded decisively. Press conferences, media tours, and documented proof of historical ownership were showcased. Interviews with historians, legal experts, and local leaders highlighted not just legality, but cultural and historical significance. The narrative shifted. The billionaires' attempts at discreditation were neutralized by transparency, preparation, and public scrutiny. By the end of the week, the first real confrontation occurred, face-to-face with representatives of the billionaires. They arrived in a sleek, intimidating convoy, projecting wealth, power, and authority. Their goal was clear: to pressure, intimidate, and reclaim control. I met them at the edge of the property, flanked by Elena, Carter, and a network of witnesses. "This land belongs to generations of my family," I stated firmly, voice carrying across the field. "You have no right to intimidate, harass, or impede restoration projects. Every action will be documented, scrutinized, and challenged." For the first time, I saw hesitation in their demeanor. Their confidence, built on wealth and influence, faltered under direct confrontation and the presence of prepared allies. They were calculating their next move, but the balance had shifted. Intimidation alone would no longer work. The following days were a whirlwind of tactical maneuvers. The billionaires attempted a coordinated campaign, legal challenges, subtle harassment of workers, attempts to sway local authorities, and even private surveillance to gather compromising information. Every day required vigilance, strategy, and rapid response. Carter and I implemented countermeasures, monitoring drone activity, tracking movements, and ensuring secure communication for all team members. Elena prepared rapid legal responses, filing injunctions, challenges, and evidence documentation to neutralize each attempted interference.
Then came the high-stakes negotiation. Representatives of the billionaire families requested a formal meeting, suggesting a settlement to avoid further legal and public escalation. It was a test, a subtle attempt to regain control by manipulating perception and creating doubt. I prepared meticulously. Every document, every historical record, every witness account was ready. Alina advised me, don't be swayed by appearances or eloquence. Their settlement offer is a tactic, not a compromise. Stick to facts, assert ownership, and never concede legacy. The meeting was tense. The representatives presented offers, suggesting joint management, financial compensation, and public acknowledgement of historical claims. But every suggestion carried hidden strings, subtle attempts to dilute ownership, influence decisions, and maintain control. I countered decisively. This land is not for sale, not for compromise, and not for manipulation, I said, my voice calm but firm. It belongs to my family, to generations past and future, and any attempt to alter that will be met with legal, public, and strategic opposition. The room grew tense. For the first time, I sensed uncertainty among the billionaires' representatives. They had underestimated determination backed by knowledge, strategy, and public accountability. Their resources were immense, but they had not anticipated resilience, preparation, and legacy as a force. The final stage of confrontation arrived weeks later. Legal courts ruled decisively in my favor, confirming ownership and historical claims. Public support, meticulously cultivated through media, community engagement, and strategic transparency, amplified the impact. Every attempt at intimidation or subtle interference was nullified, leaving the billionaires with limited options. I walked the reclaimed land, feeling the soil beneath my feet, the wind carrying whispers of generations past. The journey had been long, perilous, and exhausting, but the triumph was profound. The land, the legacy, and the history were restored. Every obstacle, every threat, and every intimidation attempt had been met with strategy, courage, and unwavering resolve. Yet even in victory, I knew vigilance was essential. The billionaires' power remained, but their overreach had been exposed. The land was safe, for now. Protection, restoration, and legacy building became the ongoing mission. Every step taken on the fields was an affirmation. Heritage cannot be erased, history cannot be bought, and determination can triumph over even the most formidable adversaries. The sun set over the rolling hills, casting long shadows and bathing the fields in golden light. Victory was achieved, but the journey for legacy and preservation was ongoing. Every inch of soil, every restored structure, and every cultivated field became a testament to courage, strategy, and the power of standing firm against overwhelming odds.
The air over the reclaimed land was tense with anticipation. After months of battles, legal, strategic, and psychological, the billionaires were preparing one final push. Every action I had taken so far had been a step in a long chess game, and now the end game was near. I could sense the magnitude of what was coming, like the quiet before a storm, whose power would either break or solidify everything I had fought for. Elena and I gathered our coalition early one morning, spreading maps, documents, and satellite imagery across the conference table. Carter monitored live feeds from the perimeter, tracking drone activity and potential incursions. Every team member understood the stakes. This was not just about land. It was about legacy, history, and the message it sent to the world. They're bringing in international legal experts, private investigators, and media strategists, Carter said, his tone grave. They're attempting to create chaos and division within our coalition. Their resources are enormous, but so is our preparation. I studied the maps, tracing boundaries, key access points, and vulnerable areas. We anticipate their moves before they make them. Every step they take, we have a counter. Every attempt at intimidation, we have documentation. Every narrative they create, we have the truth. The first confrontation arrived in the form of a coordinated effort to halt restoration projects and intimidate workers. Contractors were approached, boundaries were challenged, and subtle threats circulated through local channels. It was sophisticated, designed to test endurance, morale, and response times. I stepped onto the property, standing firmly at the edge of a freshly restored field. Workers, journalists, historians, and local leaders flanked me. The billionaires' representatives arrived in sleek vehicles, projecting confidence and authority.
attempting to intimidate not just me, but the entire coalition. "This land is private property," I stated, my voice carried across the fields. "It belongs to my family, to generations past and future. Any attempt to interfere will be met with legal action, public accountability, and strategic opposition. You may have wealth, but you do not have legacy." The representatives hesitated. The presence of witnesses, media coverage, and meticulous documentation had shifted the balance. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in their eyes. Confidence built on wealth and influence wavered under direct confrontation and the weight of truth. Elena reminded me, "This is a psychological battlefield as much as a physical one. They are testing boundaries, looking for weakness. Remain firm, remain composed, and never concede history." Over the next days, the high-stakes legal and strategic battle intensified. The billionaires filed aggressive lawsuits, sought injunctions, and attempted to sway public opinion through media campaigns. Every move was meticulously countered. Elena and I presented historical records, legal documentation, and testimony from historians and local leaders, nullifying each attempt at deception. Carter and the technology team monitored every drone, satellite, and communication feed, ensuring no surprise incursions or covert actions could threaten the land. We even coordinated with local authorities, ensuring that every legal requirement was visible and unquestionable. The pivotal moment arrived with a formal negotiation attempt, staged as a settlement meeting to resolve all disputes. Representatives of the billionaire families arrived, projecting authority and projecting a veneer of compromise. But the hidden agenda was clear: regain control subtly, influence decision-making, and create division within our coalition. I prepared meticulously. Every document, every historical map, every witness statement was ready. Elena coached me on strategy, maintaining composure and projecting unwavering confidence. "Do not be swayed by appearances or charm," she warned. "This is their final test." The meeting was tense, a calculated clash of wills. Offers were presented: financial compensation, joint oversight, and concessions, each laced with subtle strings designed to dilute control and undermine ownership. I rejected them all firmly. This land is not for sale. It is not for compromise. It belongs to generations of my family and will remain protected, restored, and honored. Any attempt to manipulate, intimidate, or dilute its legacy will be met with legal, public, and strategic resistance, I stated clearly, voice echoing across the room. The representatives faltered. They had anticipated negotiation, intimidation, and strategic submission, but they had not accounted for preparation, resilience, and the power of legacy. Their carefully constructed confidence wavered as the truth became undeniable. Wealth cannot erase history, nor can power alone override justice. Days later, the final legal decision arrived. The court confirmed full ownership, validating historical claims and recognizing the preservation efforts as both culturally and legally significant. Public support, media coverage, and community engagement had amplified the impact. Every intimidation tactic and legal maneuver was neutralized. Standing on the land, I felt a profound sense of triumph. The soil beneath my feet, the restored structures, and the cultivated fields were no longer just property. They were symbols of resilience, strategy, and determination. Every challenge had been met with courage, planning, and the unwavering will to protect what was rightfully mine. Even as the sun set, casting long golden shadows across the hills, I knew vigilance remained essential. The billionaires' power persisted, but their influence over this land had been neutralized. The battle had been won, but the mission of preservation, restoration, and legacy building was ongoing. I walked the field slowly, feeling the wind brush against my face, listening to the whispers of generations past. Every step, every restored corner, every witness and supporter represented a victory not just over wealth, but over complacency, intimidation, and injustice. The final lesson was clear. Legacy cannot be bought, history cannot be erased, and determination can overcome even the most formidable adversaries. The land was safe, the heritage was secure, and the triumph, hard-won and painstaking, was absolute. As the night embraced the hills, the stars reflected the countless generations who had walked this land before me. Victory was achieved, history honored, and a legacy preserved, for past, present, and future.